My name is Joe. I'm CEO and co-founder of Swing Dev. On this panel also with me is Marcin, our COO, and Tomek, who is our CTO, and also my co-founders in Swing Dev. So for this presentation, we assume that you're considering a remote team or your existing team has gone remote. So deciding if it's the right time in your business to engage with a remote team is really outside the scope of this workshop, but if you have any questions or need help with that, we'd be glad to discuss it with you. After this presentation, we can set up a meeting. So let's start with the first thing. Why should you listen to anything I have to say? Well, Swing Dev has nearly a decade of experience with remote teams. We work close with the top VCs and portfolio companies in the US. We've worked with over 100 startups, 100 teams remotely, and we've seen the pain points. We've seen the success of people doing it right. So we're just in a great position to share our experience and the things we've seen. And my slides are not progressing. There we go. Okay, so here's the 3 issues we're going to discuss today. The first one, if you are considering outside help, finding and choosing a remote team. Second, we're going to talk about managing a remote team effectively. And basically, this is how to be a good leader and why that's important. And then the third topic is managing your existing internal team in times now when they're all remote. So there's a lot of ways to define a good team. Normally, when we're doing this as a group, we discuss this and we pass around ideas on what people think a good team is, but we can't do that today in a webinar. So we really would like to hear your ideas on this. It's super important to us. So if you can submit your ideas on what a good team is through a Q&A button, that would be great. And we can even discuss those later in the presentation. And then also a reminder, through that Q&A, you can also submit any other questions you have. So how do we define a good team? A good team is simple. It's a match with you and your business. So there's a lot of variables and not a simple answer to this, but we're going to try to navigate you through the things you need to look for. So why is it important to pick the right team? This is not just for outsourcing. It's for employees and freelancers, especially when they're remote. So not only will you spend a lot of time with them, your team is going to build up critical product and technical knowledge. And these people, the knowledge they gain, it's really just not easy to replace. And we like to tell people they really need to realize it's much easier to pick the right team from the beginning. It's not easy to change teams later. It's really hard to make it go smooth. And in fact, it almost is never smooth. It's a really hard thing to do. So these decisions your team makes are going to impact you for months and even years down the road. So it's really critical to be working with the right people. We're going to go into the exact details of why this is important a little bit later. All right, on finding a team. So technical ability is important, but you really have to think of your trust and gut feeling you get. So we like to say that the relationship with your team is basically like a marriage. Dating, honeymoon, that's always great, but the reality, you need a right partner for the tough times. And any of you who have been in software for very long know that there's tough times. They could be around any corner and they could really come at any time. So basically, it's not if, but when, and you really need to have the right team to support you. And so to get it out of the way, let's talk about the first question everybody asks, and it's money. This question almost always is first, but the reality is hourly rate is not really an accurate indicator of what you're going to get for your money. A team that has a higher rate, a more senior team, can actually be 3 to 4 times more productive and have much lower overall cost. The real cost of using a cheap or low cost team is not about money, it's actually about time. And the easy way to understand this, ask yourself, do you hire the cheapest employees or do you seek out the most qualified? It's really no different when building a remote team. And there's a place in the market for sure for cheap $25 to $50 an hour dev houses. There's a big place in the market for it actually, but the reality, it's not really for funded startups. These type of inexperienced teams should not be in charge of early decisions that are nearly impossible to change later. Things like tech stack, programming languages, frameworks that you're going to be using. And third-party platforms, they can become very expensive with scale, like Amazon or Firebase, and they're extremely difficult to change later. So it's a fool's dream to think you can just change an MVP later and reconsider early foundational choices. It really rarely happens. And when you're working in a fast-paced startup, these like small things tend to get rewritten, but foundational choices are nearly impossible to change. So in summary, just make sure you're paying a fair and reasonable rate. Keep in mind, senior developers do not work cheap, whether it's employees, freelancers, external teams, you get what you pay for, and it's really an important thing. So what you pay is actually just not about project costs, and this is a common misconception. It's really about ongoing costs. We have an example that I can give on this. It's a client we had that is before they were their client, they were burning through millions of dollars in hosting fees on some software they wrote by developing it with low to mid-level developers. And by the time they came to us, their Amazon bill was actually over $500,000 a month. And the difference that this can make in just 4 weeks of senior developers, we were able to get their Amazon bill down over 80% and save them $5 million a year in hosting fees. And this is an extreme example, of course, but anything that they saved on dev costs in the beginning was quickly eaten up by services being used inefficiently. So there are 4 pricing models that you need to be aware of with remote teams. There's hourly, daily, monthly retainer, and fixed cost projects. Which one is best? It really depends. An hourly or day rate is great for flexibility. You can move up or down as needed. If you do a monthly retainer, there's some big benefits there because you actually guarantee dedicated resources for your projects and you don't share engineers with other clients. And the last one, fixed price. Fixed price is great, but really only if you have a solid scope. Don't put any remote teams in the position to make estimates with unknowns because they're gonna have to make assumptions, and to be safe, they can't make those assumptions in your favor. All right, so when we're looking at analyzing a team, you really need to look deeper than basic marketing materials, either employee resumes or just PDFs that people give you by email. Most teams have amazing marketing materials. I've seen these $10 an hour offshore teams that have just marketing dialed in, and it's actually super impressive looking at it. So you can't go by that alone. You really have to vet out the engineers that you're going to work with, and we're going to show you how to do that. So the questions to ask first, the simplest ones: who were the past clients? What actual projects have they done? And what scale were these projects at? So the answers of these really need to be a match with your needs to have a successful relationship. And it's really easy to not do these, but it is extremely important, and we really can't stress it enough. We see founders disregard these all the time, and there's just huge consequences down the road. So outsourcing is one of those things that has an extremely low customer satisfaction rating. And for a similar reason, many internal teams, like you may have now, operating remote, are very inefficient. And we were wondering why that was. And, a lot of times people are just not matched with the right teams, which they picked a team for the wrong reason, or they didn't pay attention to red flags. But we actually did a study last year. We were interested in certain topics in our industry, and we surveyed over 100 established and experienced dev houses that do outsourcing work. And we asked them the root cause of projects with problems, and 87% of them said communication. So clearly, this is the biggest challenge in working with teams that are remote. So how do you figure out a team you can trust, and how do you figure out a team that's going to do these things well? I'm going to go through. The first step really is to know what to avoid. And we're not trying to scare you away with these things, but these are things that are real issues, and you just need to be aware of them. These aren't things that are going to come all the time, but you need to know this happens. So avoid the yes men. What does that mean in this context? No team is a specialist in everything. Across our offices, we have nearly 100 people, and we're not even remotely good at everything. We're amazing at the things we specialize in, and we're not amazing at the things we don't. So as a first step for us, we always see if we're a match with someone. If not, we send someone away. We refer them to a trusted team who actually is a match. It's not good for anybody. But Many teams don't. You really need to avoid teams that are not asking questions. And to ask questions, to understand your project, they really need to ask a lot of questions. 2 or 3 questions over one email, they're not taking it seriously. They're not really analyzing things. And don't be turned off by a team that says no to some capabilities. It's actually a sign of being honest about their capabilities. You should worry a lot more about a team that says they can do everything on any timeline or any budget, or basically if they're just not asking a lot of questions. And the last topic is don't get bait and switch. This is a common problem in the industry. Teams will lure in clients with low estimates only for them to change later. And in fact, about 40% of the clients who come to us have experienced exactly this situation in the past. And the reason this is dev houses that are not reputable, they know it's hard to change vendors and they take advantage of it. So in summary, the biggest thing that you should be watching out for, because it's just very, very common, avoid a team that gives an estimate in 24 hours without asking questions. And it may seem obvious, but ask yourself, did they really analyze what it takes to build your product, or did they pull an estimate out of thin air just to like pick up a new client? And the next step in finding a team, of course, you need to check technical ability, but mostly check if they understand you. It doesn't matter if they can build great software fast if they build the wrong thing. There's many amazing teams out there that, by not taking the time to understand, will severely over-engineer things. And there's many not so great teams out there that will severely under-engineer things. And both are equally as dangerous, and really building the right thing in the right way will immediately get you a step ahead of competition. And a few other questions to ask yourself, just keep these in mind. How is their general communication? Are they responsive? This is the beginning. This is the dating period. If they're not responsive now, do you think they're going to be responsive when there's problems or during a normal project? Do they get your product? Do they understand your business? Are they actually interested in your industry? Are they asking questions about? Do they get your long-term vision? There really needs to be alignment in all of these things to have a good relationship with the dev team. And really trust your gut feeling. Talk to references, look at their past projects, and we see people skip this all the time. And and it's just, we hate seeing the consequences of this, but it really does happen. So on the next thing, technical vetting is very important. If you have employees that can vet the team's technical skills, that's really great. But if you don't, there are ways to make sure you're going with the right team. So first of all, don't get too caught up on finding a team with specific experience in your industry. So if you're in insurance, don't get sold on a team just because they're saying they have insurance experience. It actually matters a lot less than you think. And it is an amazing thing to find, but it's really not the most important thing. It's far more important to find a team that's actually inspired by your product and will just put in the work to understand your business. Because even if you're in a certain industry, your business is probably unique, or it's hopefully unique. So you really need to have a team that's going to be aware of how you're unique in the business or in your industry. And okay, note about time zones. On a properly run project, this is actually a great thing. On a different time zone, the team can work all day without your interference. And when it comes to remote teams that are like, let's say, an outsourced team, most of them work a later shift. They have plenty of crossover with clients. And an example, us, we work out of Warsaw, and our clients are all in the Bay Area or New York, and time zone is never an issue. And keep in mind, this also applies to your internal teams that are working remotely. People are at home with kids, they're at home with families. If possible, give them flexibility to work during the best time periods that work for them, even if it's not the typical like 9 to 5. There's a reason engineers wear headphones all day. They're more productive when they're not being bothered. And one of the great benefits of the team being on a different time zone, every morning you wake up with a fresh version of your project on dev or staging, and it's like the best way to start a day. So if you're not super technical, if you have questions like what are dev and staging environments, don't be afraid to ask your team to explain it. They won't think you're stupid. They'll actually they'll respect that you want to understand and learn the process. And actually asking these types of questions early on is a great test for you. It's really important to see if they can explain technical things in a way that makes sense if you're not a technical founder. And there's so much more to software development than coding. We have a list here on this slide, details of these specific things. It's just too much for this presentation, but we actually have a detailed checklist of this and a bunch more things that you can ask when you're interviewing potential hires or teams. And this works for, not just remote teams, but like freelancers or even internal engineering hires. So we'll send a PDF of this list to everyone after the presentation, and feel free to use that if it'll help you out. All right, on cultural differences, this is a real issue. There are teams that thrive in, say, Germany, but they just can't do business in the US. And a lot of times people don't realize why. And cultural differences are actually, even small ones are a big thing. At Swing, we actually manage different projects with different teams because they actually have a different cultural approach. So, for example, our team members in Warsaw, they're experts at building complex, scalable platforms, while our team in Brazil is incredibly skilled at making MVPs for seed stage clients. So they're both great teams, but their cultural approach is different, and it's different, and the right team really needs to be matched with the right project if it's going to be successful and done in the right way. So a lot of the cultural differences that matter come down to communication style. You'll see the repeating theme of this is communication, and you may have seen this before. I'm pretty sure someone made it like as a joke or something, but there's a lot of truth here. With your internal teams now working from home, really keep this middle section in mind. It's the most important one right now. As Americans, our first reaction is to always say things are good and okay, whether they are or not. Like if someone asks, how you doing? Good. This is what we do. It's fine, but as a leader, you need to be aware of this when you're working, when you have your teams not in the same room as you, really be aware of this, and you need to dig deeper to find out what the real answers are. And sometimes it takes asking a few times. So how do you find your dream team? Asking for a recommendation is the best way. Most VCs have a list of trusted vendors. You can ask them, ask other founders. If it's about design or engineering, feel free to ask us. We have a very specific profile of projects we're good at, but we know who the trusted teams are in the industry, and we can introduce you to people that'll help you. So one thing we want to mention, online review sites are great, but you really need to be cautious with these. They're a really good resource, but developers actually pay to be on them, and you can actually pay for your ranking. This is how these sites make money. And also developers have learned how to game the system. There's actually a whole community of software houses that are trying to boost their ratings. So they actually exchange reviews with each other so they can all boost their ratings together. So these sites are great, but just be aware that they're not always accurate. The reviews can be fake, they can be paid. So the point is, you need to do your own research too. Use these things as a baseline and some like foundational information, but you really need to take that extra step. Okay, so right now you found a team or you already have a team. We're going to talk about how to manage them. So we'll go back to our survey. The survey we did last summer, 78% of dev houses, they said that their client that's the top priority is actually not the client paying the most money. So we found when we talked to these people, the best clients get the best rates because they inspire the team to work as partners. And it's simple. If your team likes you, they will go out of their way for you. And this does not matter if it's an outsourced team, an internal team, it's the exact same concept here. So when we did this interview with all these dev houses around the world, different cultures, everything, we asked them what makes a client good or bad, and we had some amazing, like very consistent results around other countries too. So these are the top 5 things that we found teams care about. And to tell you how much they care, 100% of the dev houses that we interviewed mentioned one of the 5 things on this list. So these might actually seem like obvious, really obvious things, but they aren't always common. You have to go out of your way to show respect to your team, which means recognition. When you have to tell someone they did something wrong, do it in the proper way. Don't speak down to people. Ask questions, share your thoughts. The teams really need to absorb your brain if they're going to be successful, with your product. Show up to scheduled meetings. 84% of teams said this is important. If so many teams mention that this is important, it means there's some type of problem where people are not showing up to meetings. Try to be flexible for meetings. A lot of times, not just with remote teams, but now your internal teams, people are working different hours. Your morning is not always going to be their morning, so try to be flexible. And in summary, actually just be nice. You'd be surprised how often founders do not do these things. We work with great people, and we still see them not all doing these things. It's actually really common. So the next thing is to trust your team. The biggest thing here is be very aware of micromanaging. Nobody wants to actively do this really, but you need to trust your team and trust that they're trying to help and they're on your side. So examples of this with engineering, if they ask for a second developer to do a code review, or if they ask for more manpower to meet a deadline, trust them. The reality these days, all good teams are busy. We're busy. Almost every good team is busy. They don't suggest adding resources that are not needed. Engineers are a scarce resource just as much as they are for you. So they're not trying to put people on teams that are not needed. So the next topic, who's in charge? Communication is great. It's the biggest weakness in any project. Your whole team can communicate, but there must be an agreed upon decision maker. This can be a founder, it can be a CTO, it can be a product manager. It really doesn't matter, but it has to be someone. And if more than one person is accountable for decisions, nobody is going to be. And this is really critical right now when your teams are generally communicating through Slack or Zoom. There has to be someone who's in charge of decisions. Okay, so now we're going to cover the two approaches to product management. One is handling it internally, and the other is letting your remote team handle it. Option one, learn about product management or have a product manager on your staff internally working for you. There needs to be someone in this situation that's good at product management, and it can be you or you need to hire one. You really need a person to help prepare scope, figure out a long-term roadmap, and map out user journeys, all these things. You need to have the basics of these things, and then a good team can actually cooperate with you to figure out and fill in all the rest of the details as you move forward. And if you're just starting out and you're alone, say your seed stage, do your best to figure out this long-term roadmap. It will for sure change, but very often it can help a team make architectural decisions and save you expensive rewrites of code later if we just have some insight into your long-term plans. So when it comes to product management, if you're doing it internally, try not to micromanage, supervise people, set expectations, and trust that they'll do things. And this is really a common problem. People don't even realize they're doing it. And it's easy to fall into the micromanaging trap in the current situation when you don't have the ability to sit in the same room as your team, whether it's an outsourced team or your internal team that's all working from home right now. It's very easy, and it's especially easy these days. So be very aware of this. Keep in touch with your team. Treat and value outsourced teams the same way you would treat in-house employees. These people on the ground, they very often have the best ideas on how you can improve your products. And people say if you take care of the team will take care of the product, and it's completely true. We see it over and over. So the key thing here, keep in sync with your point of contact, learn about challenges the team is facing, and really just do whatever you can to help them. So option B here in product management, if you have other responsibilities, which many of you do, you're founders, you're busy, you're trying to raise your next round, talk to your team about taking on product management responsibilities. So a lot of time experienced teams are fully capable of doing this, but you actually must communicate this to them. That's something that you would like, because even if they can do it, they probably, not to step on your toes, they won't do it automatically. And make a plan together. It's your job as a founder to guide the team through decisions about how you're going to approach development of your product. So ask the team to present you with trade-offs. Show pros and cons of each option and ask their recommendation. They'll be glad to do this. And don't be afraid to actually ask what they would do. They actually, through experience working with enough clients or working on enough teams, they probably know the best approach, but they really do need you to make the final decision. So an example of this, so you know what I'm talking about, if we're starting with a new product, it might be the best approach to do a feature in a quick hack together way that just it fits in one current use case, or maybe it makes sense to build this feature with all precautions in place according to good engineering practices, making tests, documentation. The right approach depends on more than technology. A lot of times it's actually more often than not business decisions, where you are in funding, what your short and long-term goals are. A good team will help you work through to figure this out. That first option, of course, is way cheaper and quicker. The second one is, of course, way more robust. And usually the right solution is somewhere right in the middle. Okay, when we're doing like product decisions, these early on ones, take responsibility for them. Don't forget the decisions you made. You really cannot forget the consequences and trade-offs that are actually part of every project, that because they can catch you months or even years after you make the decisions. If a team tells you that they can hack something together for you on a really short deadline, that's great, that's amazing. But if they tell you they need to redo it later, give them a chance to redo it. Usually, if your team says it's time to rewrite something, you should really be trusting them. Usually by the time they're speaking up, it's pretty vital. All right, now we're going to talk about communicating with your internal work from home team, which is a big topic for everybody right now. The biggest thing that we've found to make this successful is with everybody working from home, try to make asynchronous communication a priority. So this is much easier if you're working with an outsourced remote team that might be in another country or on a different time zone. It's much harder to do if it's with your own team working remotely. And as I mentioned before, communication is the critical error that most teams make. And these tools that we all use today, like Slack, they're amazing tools. They're great. I even wonder how we lived without them. But the problem with them is they promote immediate and 24/7 communication. And both of these things, they become big long-term pain points for teams. And we see a lot of teams, and it's very obvious the teams with a less reactive communication environment, they have much higher quality output and overall much better team morale. We see this over and over. An example how we solved this problem, because like everyone, we had the same problem. We added custom emojis to Slack to notate if a message is urgent or not. So you can add custom emojis. We made a little siren for urgent messages, and we made like a margarita for messages that can wait. The reason we did this, people are working at a lot of different hours, different locations. Employees get stressed and they feel a lot of pressure to answer. When they get a Slack request from the CEO at 10 p.m. because you're working late, they get a lot of stress comes with that when they get these messages, and they feel obligated to respond immediately, even if it's not your intention. So whatever your standards are of communication, make it a point to actually set them, what you expect, and you need to like proactively communicate those with your team so they know. The other thing we saw with Slack conversations, try to avoid long Slack conversations. We started to see these Slack conversations discussing things go on and on and on. And you know what? Jump on a Zoom call. It's faster. And especially now when all your teams are remote and people are at home, it gives people some social interaction, and people are craving this right now. They're stuck in their houses. They need to talk to other people. So you have two wins there. If you get these long multi-page Slack conversations, cut it and go into a call. All right, trust. Trust is a big issue. Usually we're telling people why they should trust, but the reality, you have to trust your team now. You don't have any other option. They're all working remotely. I mentioned before, be extra cautious of micromanaging. Have patience for mistakes. Everyone's going to adapt to remote work conditions in different ways. Have clearly defined goals and expectations. Trust your team to deliver them. Don't expect your team right now. Everyone's transitioning to remote work, and it's different for them. Don't expect your internal team that's not used to this to be fully effective right now. Kids are home. Parents need to be taken care of. People are in survival mode. And these may seem like obvious things, but you actually need to keep them in the front of your mind and just have a very active approach to these things, or it's easy to let them slip away. And making difficult decisions, there's going to be a lot of difficult decisions that founders are going to be making over the next weeks and months. Teams, we found, we've seen all sorts of situations. Good teams understand that you have to make difficult decisions, but we've also seen the founders that give them decisions that they make with explanations and context behind their decision. It goes a long way. It's important to keep team morale high, like especially right now, but it's far more important to keep their trust. So explain your decisions you make. And of course, you don't have to explain everything, but in the times when it makes sense, go ahead, give your team context of why you're doing things. They'll appreciate the transparency. So now more than ever, it's really, really important to have an idea of the pulse of your team. You should really be utilizing tools like 15.5 or Lattice. Both of these things, they'll help you gauge happiness and morale of your team. We've been using them for a long time, a couple of years at least, and they really, really work. I don't know what we would do without them. The best thing, these tools are automated. It's a critical feature when you're busy. The questions go out to all the employees, and you get their responses, and it's really helped us like jump ahead of situations before they become a big deal. And along the same lines, make sure you implement a high five system in Slack or your other tools. You would be surprised how your team members will step up to motivate and support each other, especially right now. And these high fives are super effective at doing that. People love to do it. And anyway, on these two, 15.5 or Lattice, if you have any questions, there's probably more out there. If there's ones that you use, share them through the Q&A. We can share these with all the attendees when we send out the follow-up email. But if you have specific questions about these two products and how we use them or how they've worked for us, Martin, our COO, he loves testing software. He dives into everything that we use, and he would be glad to take some time to share the experience that we had and how it's worked best for us. All right, processes. Processes are always important, but they're super important now with everybody not working in the same room. Simple things. It's the simple stuff that really causes problems. Are specific working hours expected right now? Communicate that to your team, not only if they are expected, if they have to work certain hours, but also communicate that if it's not important that they work at the exact specific hours you expect. There's a lot of stress right now. You need to do things that will reduce the stress in your team. Have flexibility if possible. One of the things, put a specific process in place for people who need to be out of office when they're sick. The easiest way, the thing that we use, we have a shared calendar. Put people, if there's, everyone can be part of, everyone can edit. If people are not feeling well or they just need time off or whatever, you have a common shared calendar for people's availability. And the last thing is keep normal communication like in place. Events over Zoom, like if you do a monthly all hands meeting or if you do weekly team updates, do all these things, do them over Zoom, do them over video, so people need to see each other's faces right now. We've been doing this, for people not used to full-time remote work, it can be actually extremely difficult, and people are not getting a break from home life right now. And some people love this and they handle working from home very well. For others, it's the most stressful thing in the world. And go out of your way, have intentional non-work meetings and communication. Last week we did a whiskey night over Zoom, and last night our team did charades over Zoom. But keep in mind, you will have lonely team members while everybody's remote, and it's pretty certain they're either scared to speak up or they're embarrassed to speak up. So take it upon yourself, create opportunities for your team to virtually socialize, because it's not often that they're going to actually do it on their own. And it's not just after hours. We've done some of these things after hours, but dedicate social breaks during work hours. And it is going to work in your favor. It will increase productivity. In a normal office, people huddle around a water cooler and they take breaks for a reason. People that are productive, your best people, their brain needs rest. So don't expect that to change just because people are remote. So in summary, make sure your team knows these simple things. They may be obvious to you, but they actually need to be communicated to your team. One of the things to mention that is a big deal right now, everybody's at home. Kids or dogs accidentally come on cameras, people walk in rooms. Everybody understands that right now. It happens. It's not a big deal. But what people, employees, they get really unnecessarily stressed over these things. So make it a point to actually tell them, assuming this is okay with you, that it's okay that things happen. They're going to happen anyway. We might as well take the stress out of those situations so people could laugh at it and just basically move on. So this is the end of our content for the main presentation. If we missed something, if there's something that's important to you that we didn't cover, go ahead and send it to Q&A or reach out to us after. We've been fully remote for weeks. Our employees have actually had the option to work from home for years, so we have a lot of processes. We've made it work really well. In this whole situation that we're dealing with, we've been easily able to maintain 100% efficiency. And we put our email addresses on here. Feel free to reach out to any of us. And I will pass over to Martin to see if we got any Q&A questions we can answer.
Yeah, we actually have one question. And also, guys, keep in mind that you can always speak up. We can unmute you and let you speak to the group. So if you'd rather ask your question directly instead of typing it, that's fine. So the question we have is do you have any specific practical tips about how to choose the right team to work with?
Besides all the things we mentioned, and we did mention this actually, you really should just ask for recommendation. There's tens of hundreds of thousands of teams out there. It's impossible to sort through it all. Ask your VC, ask your investors, ask other founders. All the VCs have it's not just engineering, by the way. They have recommended vendors for accounting, lawyers, designer, really almost anything that you'll need as a fast growing startup. So I would actually recommend starting there. Those people have a vested interest in making sure you're successful, so you can usually trust their recommendations.
Okay. And the second question I'm saying is how would you recommend to work with Slack to avoid constant interruptions?
You know what? This was a big challenge for us actually, and we're still not perfect at it, but because it's like how Slack was designed to interrupt us constantly. We've talked about our solution with the custom emojis. It's a partial solution. People still get notifications. They should use do not disturb. You should tell them they should use do not disturb on unavailable hours. The two things that I personally do, a lot of times I'll simply just, if I have messages for people, I'll type them in Slack and not send them. Slack actually changes the notifications on the top to show that you have drafts for each person, so you can actually send them the next day. And the other thing that I use a lot actually is super cool, and I think it's a plugin, but it's a schedule feature. And it's real easy to find. And what you do is you can hit /schedule and you can send a message to a person, and it doesn't come up. You can say to send it at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. So if I'm working late at night, I have a lot of late client calls and I have questions for project managers. I can schedule a message that'll pop up during their morning. So that's really nice because I've heard they've told me that when they get late night messages from me, that they need to stop what they're doing, even though I've told them I don't want them to do that. So the solution is get rid of the notifications and schedule them for the next morning.
Mm-hmm. I think the app is called Timey. It's like tiny, but with an M instead of N.
Oh, okay, cool.
That's the one that works really well. There is a free plan that you can utilize for scheduling in the next 24 hours, which is usually what you need anyway.
Okay.
And that's true. That works for us very, very well. It's always important to match the message to the channel that you're going to use to communicate with your team, and also to make sure that your message is landing at a proper time for the recipient.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any other questions typed in? No, I don't see anything else.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Hopefully there was at least one thing in here that was useful for you and will help you work with your teams better. We would be happy to have a discussion with you about this topic. If we've not only done a lot of things, but we've seen a lot of things in a lot of startups we've worked with. So if you want to schedule a call, we can do what we can to give you more detailed advice. Or if you have specific questions, I know people don't always like asking them in groups. So reach out to us at those email addresses you saw, and we'll also be sending out the content we prepared for this, the checklist that you can ask for hiring engineers or hiring remote teams. We'll send that all out to you. And if you have any questions about that stuff, also don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you. Goodbye.